When I was in middle school, I had a friend named Tom, whom I always hung out with. Recess, cafeteria, chess club. He was my first real friend, I suppose. I think I was his only friend at the time as well. He wasn't creepy. He was very outgoing, in fact. But he chose the people around him wisely. Take your best qualities in an extrovert and put them in an introvert. I think that's what Tom was. But he had a dark side, a side he almost never showed and kept locked away deep inside himself. I only wish he trusted me enough to talk to me about it. I'm not sure something was going on at home. I had never met his parents, so who knows what they were like. I grew up with parents fighting all the time, and that alone was draining. I tried asking several times if he'd like for me to come over and stay the night. Stay up playing Halo Reach, flush a 12-pack of Mountain Dew down our throats, and smash some Guitar Hero. But he always said no. Parents didn't like having people over. They wouldn't even let him come over to my house. That was enough to convince me that his parents must have sucked. Maybe mine weren't so bad after all. Tom would show up to school sometimes, looking like he had been run through the mud and had little to no sleep. I'd have to yell his name in the morning before school when we were sitting in the gym on the bleachers so he wouldn't miss class. He was dozing in and out. I was really worried for him. I wish I could have done more. During our 7th grade year, things seemed to get worse, then better all of a sudden. Tom would miss classes, sometimes not even show up at all. He'd never tell me why, just said he was all right and everything was going to be okay. He never did miss any of our chess club tournaments. One day before class, he'd walked across the street from the school and picked up a cigarette butt and tried to light it. I didn't understand what was getting into him. He just seemed like he didn't care anymore. Then out of nowhere one day, he had this smile I'd never seen before on his face. He wasn't Tom. No, he was something else. Something better. We were talking during lunch when I brought it up. He said he'd tell me when the time was right, but that he was happy, happier than he'd ever been. Soon after lunch, he invited me over to his house for the longly awaited sleepover. His parents would be out of town, and they had no way of keeping tabs on someone coming over. No cameras, no proof. It was daring, but as a young boy, that's what life is all about. Of course, I was cool with it. That afternoon after school, I rode the bus with him back to his house. I'd already asked my parents, and they didn't care, so long as I wasn't worried about wearing the same outfit 2 days in a row. I think they'd been fighting anyway, spared me some trauma for the night. His house was in a horrible part of town. You certainly wouldn't want to be caught walking these streets by yourself, especially at night. This wasn't a place I imagined him living in, but it explained a lot. His house was pretty small. The windows were cracked, grass was almost a foot tall, and it looked like random pieces of scrap and metal were piled up around the yard, along with parts to lawnmowers and other random items. The inside of his house was a lot better, though not by much. He'd taken me to his bedroom immediately upon entry. I can't say I saw much of his house, as I never left his room the entire night I was over there. He said his parents would know somehow he'd had someone over if he let me go exploring, so it would be best to just hang out in his room. I remember the smell. I had to pinch my nose while Tom wasn't looking. I didn't want him to catch me doing it. Thought it would be rude, but I couldn't get over it. We played video games the whole night, until we'd fallen asleep with the controllers in our hands, waking up the next morning and taking the bus to school. A day or so later, Tom stopped showing up to school again, and I didn't hear from him ever again. He'd killed his parents almost a week before I showed up to stay the night. That was the smell in his house, the smell of his decomposing parents. I smelled dead people. My friend Claire and I were what every girl back in their freshman year of high school called BFFs. I still cringe when I think about those times. We shared a lot of the same hobbies, from cheer to tennis, though our talents were clearer in one more than the other. If you're wondering, we sucked at tennis. She always made me laugh and knew how to cheer me up if I was ever upset about a boy or when my dog passed away. I couldn't live without her. She's the only reason I ever got through high school, maybe even life back then. We did everything together, but there was one thing I think we only did once and never did again. Sleepover at her house. She'd held a secret from me, one so weird and off the wall that I was shocked when I found out that night I stayed over. She loved dolls, but it wasn't just that. She loved bringing them to life. She was practicing ventriloquism. Her room had been cluttered with dozens of dolls, their eyes seeming to follow you as you moved across the room. I don't know how she slept in there. I was already wanting to leave, but I didn't tell her that. Claire would have hated me. I couldn't bear to do that to her, at least not yet. Some of the dolls were actually kind of cute, with their little pink dresses, white bows, or little white slippers and their hair curled. She was proud of them. I could tell she'd been wanting to tell me about them for a while. Her face would light up telling me about them and how much she'd been practicing. She gave me a little show with a couple of her favorites, and I was actually very impressed. She showed me what throwing your voice was, where you can make it sound like someone is talking from somewhere else. When the show was over, I asked her which one was her least favorite. Of course, there would be one. If you have favorites, you probably also have least favorites. She obviously didn't have to think about that question, because she immediately got up and walked over to her closet, where she pulled out this super creepy doll. His face was a pale porcelain gray, teeth like they were shaved down slightly, almost to fine points. The eyes were large and wide, the color of hazel. He wore a head of red hair and was dressed up only in overalls. Looked like something out of Children of the Corn. She brought him over to the bed. I reached to feel his face, but she quickly pulled him away. "He doesn't like to be touched. You're lucky I brought him out of the closet. He doesn't like new people either." I wasn't sure if she was being serious or still putting on a show for me, nor did I ask. She told me her dad found it for her over in Germany when he'd been in the military, keeping it as a souvenir. Once she'd taken a liking to dolls, he decided he'd give it to her, but she quickly found out it had a dark side. It had a mind of its own. She'd find him in places she never put him, find writing in her notebook that she never wrote down, with the initials RD. She said she guessed that was his name, but wasn't sure what it meant. It had been storming that night, the rain pattering on the window in her bedroom as we were sleeping, the occasional flash of lightning. I thought I'd heard something rustle in her closet, but it was just wind picking up outside, pushing against the window. I'd lie and say all her dolls didn't make it harder to go to sleep. They were just staring at you the entire time you were in her room. Tack on the storm, and it made for a cover to a new R.L. Stine's Night of the Living Dummy book. As easy as I usually sleep during a storm, this time I couldn't. Every slight noise woke me up. Each time I was expecting something to be standing beside my bed, watching me sleep. Still thinking about the doll in the closet, to put myself at ease, I'd woken up again and went to check on it in the closet, just to make sure it was still there. It was, but as I closed the door, I could have sworn it shifted its eyes up to me from the floor. I didn't bother checking again that night. Soon, I was sleeping deeply until the morning. I woke up to screaming and stomping. As groggy as I was, I managed to stand alert without even donning a yawn or a stretch. I was spooked. The room was a total mess. Lampshades thrown across the room. The dolls face down on the floor, scattered across the floor wall to wall. All of her makeup had been broken into, and lipstick had been written across her vanity mirror. She was bawling her eyes out, and when she saw that I was up, she told me to get out. I asked why, to which she pointed at the mirror. RD was written across it in what appeared to be the handwriting of a child. I couldn't believe what was going on. Couldn't believe Claire had gone this far as to make all of this up. Of course the doll wasn't alive. That's not possible. Someone should have given her an Oscar because her act was convincing, almost had me second-guessing everything. She pulled me out of her room and slammed the door. Her mother was in the kitchen when she heard the door shut hard. I told her what was going on, and she just shook her head in disappointment. This had obviously happened before. I called my mother and had her pick me up not too long after Claire's mother made me some breakfast. Claire still hadn't left her room, and I was about to open her door and say goodbye when I heard her talking. She was whispering, pleading. I could hear the tears in her voice. How was she still going? She wasn't proving anything to anyone at this point. Why would she be talking to herself? Is she actually nuts? Then I heard someone else speak, a voice like a little boy's, but stern. I cracked the door open, where I saw the doll from the closet sitting on the end of her bed. Claire sprung up to run and shut the door, and that's when I saw the doll's neck crane towards me, its eyes glued to mine.